Discover the unexpected connection. How a lone rancher transformed a tamed Chinese girl's life. Jake stood on the porch of his weather-beaten ranch, the vast Montana plains stretching before him like an endless canvas. The world felt muted, as if he were an observer of a distant movie. The rustle of wind through the fields a reminder that nature, once vibrant and alive, was being choked by the encroaching technology. Neighbors kept to their screens, absorbed in an artificial existence, while Jake found himself feeling like a relic of a time that no longer existed. He gripped a beer can tightly, the cold metal grounding him amidst rising unease. The fear that he was losing touch not only with the world around him but with himself. When a figure appeared out of the dust rising on the road, Jake squinted against the glaring sun. A timid girl stepped into view, her presence marked by an aura of uncertainty. May, the university's exchange student, a timid spirit adrift in a relentless tide of scrutiny. He noticed her hesitant steps and the way she clutched her textbooks, as if they could shield her from the judgment of intolerant faces. A spark of kinship ignited within him, a recognition of shared loneliness despite the vast disparities between their lives. The initial encounter shattered Jake's routine. May's uncanny ability to grasp complex agricultural theories intrigued him, yet it struck him with a fear, the fear of change, of what this girl might represent in his waning world. She challenged him, igniting a flicker of hope, but with it came an inner turmoil, a nagging question. Could he truly break free from the stagnant past? His instincts screamed for self-preservation, terrified of what he might lose if he let her in. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. With every evening spent in May's company, Jake shared the grueling truth of ranch life, the mud, the sweat, the heartache. Yet with every lesson taught, he felt her growing presence enabled him to rediscover the land he had taken for granted. But their connection was fragile, burgeoning against a backdrop of prejudice that lay ahead like a storm cloud.
One day she would face the coarse jabs, the belittling remarks he had long thought were extinguished beneath his rugged exterior. The moment came unannounced, lacing fear through his veins as he watched her stand before a professor who dismissed her ideas with a wave, laughter rippling through the lecture hall like a cruel wind. The swell of injustice pricked at his heart, blood roaring against the silence he had maintained for so long.
As he stepped forward, adrenaline coursing through him, he was suddenly acutely aware that this moment would not only challenge him, but it could unravel everything he had built his life on. A life of solitude, just shy of despair. What had begun as an unexpected companionship now dangled on the edge of turmoil, drawing Jake into an impossible choice: save his own guarded existence or fight for the girl whose quiet strength reminded him of everything he had once overlooked. As he braced himself for the confrontation, the weight of uncertainty clawed at him, pressing down with relentless urgency. Would they each find what they sought, or would the shadows of judgment and expectation suffocate their bond? Jake pushed through the emotional barricade he had erected around himself, each step toward May a deliberate act of defiance against his own fears. The laughter that reverberated through the lecture hall haunted him. He could feel the collective disdain of the students directed at May, their expressions a mixture of arrogance and ignorance that sent flames of anger coursing through his veins. This was not just about her. It was about him too. About the choices he had made to be silent, to be passive. As he took a step forward, the eyes of the room turned toward him. It felt as though time collapsed, the din of laughter muffled to a distant whisper. Jake regarded the professor, a figure of authority who had become a symbol of the very discrimination he had tried to distance himself from. He struck out, words tumbling from his mouth with an urgency he hadn't expected. "What you just did is unacceptable," he found himself saying, his voice steady despite the tumultuous emotions roiling in his gut. Surprised gasps echoed around him, He felt their judgment like a weight pressing down. Doubt swirled in his mind. Was he really prepared for this fight? The reality of confronting an institution, one that had meticulously built its pillars on privilege, threatened to send him back into the shadows he'd inhabited for so long. Yet as he looked at May, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and admiration, something deeper surged within him. A new responsibility. "What did you say?" The professor snapped, surprise giving way to irritation. The combativeness stirred in Jake, fueled by the sight of May's slump. This was his moment. There could be no retreat. "She deserves as much respect and consideration as any other student," he challenged, feeling the words ignite a flame reflecting the strength he saw in May. "You dismiss her without even considering her ideas. You perpetuate a cycle that can stop here and now." The room fell silent, the tension so thick it felt like a physical barrier. Jake's heart raced, every beat echoing his fear but also a strange exhilaration. Maybe, after all those years of hiding behind the quiet of the ranch and the numbness of routine, he had awakened something in himself that had long been dulled. A sense of clarity consolidated around him. Fighting for May also meant fighting for himself, for his own value, and dismantling the fears that had taken root in his life. As the professor opened his mouth to respond, time stretched painfully. Jake prepared himself for a backlash, steeling his resolve against whatever barbed words would soon follow. May's presence seemed to bolster him, validating his newfound courage. He resolved to stand firm and unyielding, just as he had with the land that had once threatened to swallow him whole. But as the moment of confrontation hung suspended in the air, he could also sense a whisper of doubt creeping back in, as if unseen hands were trying to pull him away from this emerging purpose. Was this truly a turning point, or simply a reckless moment of defiance? The uncharted territory of this new chapter in his life pulsated with uncertainty, leaving Jake to question whether he could sustain this newfound courage beyond the walls of the university. As the professor's voice finally emerged, cold and analytical, a new pang of fear tinged with determination invaded Jake's consciousness, one that posed a greater question about his own future. Would he have the strength to persist, to confront the shadows of his own upbringing as he boldly stepped into the light for May? Just then, the professor's words took an unexpected turn, igniting a revelation that shocked Jake to his core. "As a rancher, you claim to know about responsibility. What happens when the world wants to drag you back to silence?" The moment lingered, and Jake's world narrowed to the point of confrontation, his identity now inseparable from May's struggle. What lay ahead would demand not only his defense of her, but also a reckoning with everything he had come to believe about who he was. And most importantly, could he rise up against the silent judgment of his neighbors and reclaim his voice? The professor's condescension dripped like rain on parched earth, and Jake felt an insatiable thirst for validation pulsating through him. It wasn't merely about defending May anymore, it was about defining who he was in the broader context of struggle. As the professor continued to critique him, Jake's fists clenched involuntarily at his sides. Each word felt like a chisel shaping the marble of his identity, revealing the figure hidden beneath layers of fear and silence. With each pointed remark, Jake's resolve hardened. He realized that he had been tiptoeing around his own sense of self, a waltz with fragility, while the world had been unrelenting. This confrontation, while centered around May, opened a door he didn't know existed, a corridor laden with the potential for personal renewal. The weight of expectation hung over him. And yet, amid the chilling scrutiny of his peers, he found warmth in the embers of defiance kindling within him. "Do you think your experience gives you the right to silence others?" The professor's voice drew Jake further into the depths of the confrontation. "What do you truly know about responsibility?" Those words clawed at Jake's insides, summoning self-doubt. The ranch had taught him resilience, difficult decisions, persistent hardships, and the weight of responsibility toward living things. Yet here he stood, feeling the echoes of his upbringing swallowed by academia's polished veneer. Most importantly, he was painfully aware of how often he had relinquished his voice. Jake's mind raced through memories of his childhood. The way he watched his father fight the land during droughts. How his mother's quiet strength always seemed to carry the family through storms. Those lessons carved deep within him a recognition that responsibility wasn't silent. It roared like a wildfire. Jake had been taught not just to shoulder burdens, but to speak out for what mattered. "I know that all lives matter," he responded, the tremor of his earlier insecurity replaced by an assertive clarity. "And if you want students to feel safe and valued, then you'd better start treating them that way, including May." Surprise flickered in the professor's eyes, but Jake sensed it was quickly suppressed. He stepped closer, suddenly aware that others were also watching, students shifting in their seats, leaning forward as if waiting for a spark to ignite a fire within them. An opportunity for solidarity was awakening, and the idea of standing alone seemed less daunting with allies lurking in the shadows. The professor hesitated, a fracturing expression hinting at uncertainty. But with a sweeping glance he regained composure. "Perhaps you misunderstand the nature of academia, young man," he rejoined, a veneer of authority in place. But Jake noted its falter. His gut twisted with a mixture of anticipation and fear. Would the institution truly allow this crack to widen, or would the norm swallow him whole? "Respect isn't given based on the titles we wear," Jake pressed on. "It comes from recognizing each individual's worth regardless of the background or struggle." A rising tide of voices within him pushed for expression, clamoring to drown out the familiar specter of silence he had allowed to reside too long. Jake caught May's gaze, which flickered with vulnerability and unveiled potential. A soft smile creased her lips, sparking something even more intense within him. Determination not just to defend, but to create real change. As the professor grappled for an appropriate retort, Jake felt a sudden spiraling realization. This moment could lead to something monumental, altering not just his trajectory, but also collectively influencing early perceptions built on archaic biases in their academic foundation. Yet lurking beneath that possibility was a chilling question. Could he sustain this momentum? Jake took a breath, tasting the air thick with potential. "I'm not afraid of your judgment anymore," he declared, an electrifying truth shimmering in his words. "Fight me or educate me. Either way, I refuse to stand by in silence." And as that assertion left his lips, he sensed it, a shift in the room, a collective intake of breath that hinted at a reality Jake had only begun to understand. He was not simply defending, he was evolving, catching glimpses of the person he was meant to be. But as he turned away from the professor's flustered figure, he couldn't shake the unease that coiled within him. What if this battle marked only the beginning of a larger confrontation yet to come? What other facets of his life needed to change if he was to truly embrace rising from the shadows? Thus, under the weight of his newly claimed voice, Jake set his course into the unknown, resolute yet apprehensive, aware that the real challenge lay ahead. A personal battle, one that would not only shape his destiny but dive deep into the undercurrents of change rippling through his world. Jake stepped out of the lecture hall, adrenaline still coursing through his veins. The muted chatter of his classmates faded into a steady thrum as he navigated the bustling corridors, each face a reminder of what had transpired. The confrontation felt like a seismic shift, one that had cast him into the limelight but also made him acutely aware of the precariousness of that spotlight. He had challenged authority and found his voice, but now, with the echo of his words ringing in his ears, a flood of questions surged forth. He had defended May fiercely, but at what cost? Was he prepared for the inevitable backlash? The professor's disapproval would not linger in isolation. It would ripple through the administration and his peers, who would either rally around him or pull away in fright. A blend of excitement and trepidation washed over him. What if this declaration of independence marked the beginning of something more profound than just an academic debate? Jake paused at a window, watching the leaves tremble in the wind. The ranch had taught him resilience, but facing the complexities of individual choices in an academic setup felt dizzyingly different. What now? He whispered to himself, feeling the weight of his uncertainty. The questions hung in the air, charging the moment with a sense of urgency. He peered deeper into his own mind, searching for clarity in the chaotic aftermath of confrontation. He thought of the moments spent on the ranch, the endless tasks that demanded his attention and the countless decisions that had to be made without any safety net, the choices that shaped how he perceived responsibility. He recalled his mother's wisdom about standing up for others, a lesson heavily ingrained in him, but he had often ignored it in favor of fitting neatly into the expectations laid before him in academia. Jake felt a stirring, a defense of not just May but of others like her, those who were muted by conformity and fear. He wanted to be more than a student, more than a bystander. He wanted to craft a path where voices could coalesce, not compete. But that path was dense with uncertainty, and each potential step bore the weight of making difficult choices. Focus, he muttered, shaking off his musings. He had given the confrontation much thought, but the excitement of taking action must now translate beyond words. What could he do to galvanize this pivotal moment? Jake's thoughts turned to strategies. He needed allies, people willing to band together for something collegiate and meaningful. He envisioned creating a simple discussion group, an informal platform where students could voice their experiences, developing a community that would disrupt the very culture of silence that churned the campus waters. But how to initiate this? The thought of canvassing fellow students filled him with hesitation. What if they didn't share his vision? What if the bravery he felt now faded the moment he was met with doubt or ridicule? Determination hardened within him as he made a conscious decision to move past self-doubt. He recalled the professor's own hesitation during their exchange and saw the potential for a shift within the academic arena. Maybe he wouldn't have to convince everyone at once. If he could spark interest in just a few willing spirits first, they might bolster his cause. As he made his way toward the student lounge, a sudden realization ignited. This was not merely about defending May anymore. It was about paving the way for reform. His heart began to race at the thought. This is the start, he muttered aloud, feeling every nerve alight with possibility. But mingling excitement with fear was the gnawing realization that pushing for change often meant facing those who might resist vehemently. The professor wasn't the only figure in power on campus. What if other influential voices could wield their authority against his efforts? He scanned the lounge, spotting familiar faces and sensing potential allies in a sea of old acquaintances. Swallowing the lump in his throat, he approached a small cluster of students, steeling himself for the challenge ahead. "Can we talk?" Jake spoke, his heart pounding louder than his words. The moment felt electric, but would it spark connection or igniting conflict? In this realm of uncertainties, he stood at the precipice of opportunity, aware that with every choice made he was weaving the narrative of his own emergence. The thrill of transformation coursed through him, both exhilarating and terrifying. And just as he prepared to share his vision, a figure behind him caught his attention, someone with a reputation for caution, the perfect test of his newfound resolve. The moment hung heavy, teetering on the brink. Would he dare confront this new challenge or retreat to safer grounds? Jake shifted his weight nervously as he turned to face the figure behind him. Clara, the student government president, known for her meticulous approach and reluctance to stir the pot. She embodied the cautious mindset that kept many students tethered to their fears. "Hey Jake," she said, her tone polite but tinged with caution. "I heard about the lecture. Quite a bold move." "Thanks," he replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "Can we talk? I think there's something important we need to address on campus." Clara hesitated, glancing around the lounge before moving closer. "I'm not sure. You know how things can get with the faculty. Involving them can lead to complications. But that's the problem," Jake interjected, feeling the heat of urgency building within him. "It's the complications that need to be confronted. Students like May shouldn't feel silenced or marginalized. We need to create a safe space for discussions that matter." She studied him, her brow furrowing in contemplation. "I agree, but it's a tricky situation. If we step too far, we risk backlash. Votes could shift, and we could lose support. You have to think strategically about this." A wave of frustration threatened to overtake him. "When does strategic thinking become complacency? I'm not looking for just a safe path, Clara. This is about standing up for what's right. I need allies who share that vision." "You're passionate, and I admire that," she replied, her voice softening. But passion without strategy can be reckless. I want to help, but we need to approach this with caution. We have to be smart about how we mobilize. Jake's determination solidified. If we don't act now, when will we? After another student feels they can't speak out? That's not the legacy I want to leave behind. He searched her eyes for understanding, hoping to ignite a flame of resolve. Clara bit her lip, torn between her instinct to protect the status quo and her growing respect for Jake's fervor. Okay, let's say I'm in. But we have to start small, gather a few like-minded students to brainstorm. We can't go in guns blazing. Relief washed over Jake. That's all I need, a starting point. Let's focus on generating interest before addressing the larger issues. But we'll need a plan. I have connections who might help, but first, we need to create a robust dialogue, Clara added, her strategic approach grounding his enthusiasm. Jake could feel his spirit lifting. Perhaps his inner conflict could mesh with her careful calculation. They did not have to exist in opposition. Instead, they could create a strategy that mobilized compassion without disregarding caution. We can hold an initial meeting just between us, he suggested, his mind racing with the possibilities. No one has to know until we're ready. Good call. Let's build momentum before we go public. Clara agreed, but deep down, Jake sensed her hesitation remained. As they discussed details, Jake's thoughts turned inward, reflecting on the internal struggle he had faced. He could grasp this opportunity, but doubt threatened to flicker in the corners of his mind. What if he couldn't bring others along with him? The conversations moved lightheartedly at first, but Jake's apprehension loomed as he acknowledged the larger confrontation ahead. They were setting the groundwork for something meaningful, but part of him itched at the thought of resistance from entrenched powers. The gravity of steering a ship into uncharted waters was not lost on him. Eventually, they wrapped up their discussion. I'll reach out to a few people and we'll meet later this week to plan further, Clara said, her demeanor shifting to focus. Jake felt the tension release momentarily, but as he walked away, a gnawing thought emerged, clinging stubbornly in the recesses of his mind. They could lay the groundwork, but if they pushed too hard too soon, would they face the very backlash he dreaded? The tension rose within him, a heady mix of anticipation and dread. The time had come to face those entrenched in authority, to challenge the very culture that sought to stifle dissent. Jake wondered, would Clara stand resolute alongside him as they planted the seeds for change? Just then, another thought struck him. What if they were not the only ones feeling stifled? As he stared out the lounge window, an idea began to take root, shadowed by uncertainty. Their efforts could inspire others to rise, but confronting the inevitable backlash would be the real test of his resolve. Were they prepared for the waves of resistance that were sure to follow? As he turned the corner, he caught a glimpse of May in the hall, her resolve quietly unshaken. In that moment, Jake knew their battle had only just begun. Jake's mind raced with the possibilities that lay ahead. Clara's cautious optimism provided a fragile buoy to his brewing storm of determination. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that they might be walking into a minefield. As he made his way down the halls, the reality of their undertaking weighed heavily on him. Each step felt charged with an electricity forged from fear and fervor. The image of May lingered in his thoughts, her quiet strength among the crowd of students defined by silence. He had seen how fearless she could be when she spoke about her experiences. He also saw how quickly she quieted herself when skepticism filled the room. What if they could harness her courage to amplify their message? The idea sparked a flicker of hope in his chest. If they could unite others like her, they'd stand a chance against the forces that sought to silence their voices. As he reached the library, Jake ducked between the rows of bookshelves searching for a quiet corner. He needed to gather his thoughts. The library had always been his sanctuary, a place to escape, to dream, and today it might also serve as his brain's war room. He plopped down at a table and fought against the torrent of doubt swirling in his mind. His stomach twisted as he sifted through the weighty implications of stirring up unrest. What if he failed? The prospect of rallying students to a cause was daunting, but the thought of being rejected by those he hoped to inspire felt even worse. He didn't just want to be a voice, he wanted to be a beacon for change. He took a deep breath and pulled out some paper. Jake wrote down names: May, Clara, a few others he had seen hesitant yet engaged during lectures. He scribbled keywords: courage, unity, action. They were not mere platitudes. They were the building blocks of his vision. With every line he wrote, his resolve hardened. He envisioned a small group, each member contributing their unique voice, fitting into a larger narrative. This could work. An unsettling thought crept in, freezing his hand mid-write. What if someone like Clara, with her cautious approach, questioned his ability to lead this initiative? He couldn't let fear impede their potential movement. Jake needed to find a way to merge his drive for action with a structured plan, and he had to communicate this to Clara. Suddenly he felt a shift in the atmosphere, like a ripple traveling through the air. He looked up to see May walk into the library, her hands clasped nervously while she scanned the room. When their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them, a shared understanding of the struggle of voicing one's truth. Jake nodded slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement and solidarity. She strolled over, her brows knitting together in curiosity. "Hey, Jake, what's going on?" He hesitated, weighing the gravity of her question. "I'm trying to put together a group to tackle some issues on campus. You know, create a space where students can voice their concerns. I was wondering if you'd be interested in helping out." May's eyes widened with a combination of surprise and interest. "Like a meeting with others?" "Yes," Jake confirmed, his heart racing. "We need to strategize, see who feels the same way, who wants things to change." Her expression shifted. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face, but resolve quickly replaced it. "I'd like that. I know others who might want to talk too. I can help." Jake felt a rush of excitement mixed with anxious energy. "Great. We'll need everyone's stories to drive this forward." The two exchanged ideas, and Jake sensed that May's involvement radiated something vital. They wasn't alone in this struggle. As they planned, another thought struck him. The more their group grew, the more attention they would draw, and with that attention would come scrutiny. An unsettling realization hit him. What if they faced not only student apathy but administrative backlash as well? Despite the invigorating collaboration unfolding, Jake felt that familiar tension building. Their collective courage would be tested, and doubt loomed ominously in the background. As their conversation deepened, a new resolve blossomed within Jake. He would not surrender to fear. He would challenge it, confront it, head on. They were building not only a plan, but a community. His thoughts collided as he contemplated the stakes. Were they ready to visibly fight back against the inertia that oppressed them? The movement was beginning to take shape beneath his fingertips, but Jake realized this was merely the beginning. Just then, a text alert on his phone interrupted his thoughts. It was a message from Clara confirming their meeting. The weight of expectations pressed heavily upon him. Would they be ready to face the complexities of their undertaking together? Could the fire they were igniting withstand the bitter winds of opposition? With a renewed sense of purpose, Jake felt ready to confront that uncertainty, but now the true challenge awaited. How would they respond when the storm finally broke? Jake's fingers hovered over the scattered papers scribbled with names and ideas as anticipation swirled in the pit of his stomach. The thought of their upcoming meeting with Clara loomed large. The prospect of sharing his vision, of stepping into the role of leader, both invigorated and terrified him. What if their ambitions collided with an icy wall of indifference from their peers? What if Clara didn't buy into his vision? He exhaled slowly, trying to dispel the apprehension that threatened to choke him. A part of him was fiercely aware that leadership required not only conviction, but also the ability to inspire belief in others. May's tentative agreement had stirred something deeper within him. Could he push beyond his own doubts and fuel the fire in others? In the minutes that followed, Jake began structuring his thoughts more clearly. He recalled the words he had jotted down: action, courage, unity. Each term had sparked a memory that connected him to the people he wanted to include in this cause. There were moments in classrooms where voices rose above the noise and he felt a collective yearning for change. They could channel that energy, but only if he could articulate a vision compelling enough to pull others in. As the clock ticked down towards their meeting, another wave of uncertainty crashed over him. How would Clara perceive his enthusiasm? Would she question his resolve? He envisioned her gentle demeanor. Would it serve as a grounding force or a counterbalance to his fervor? Jake had to approach this meeting as a rational architect, not just an emotional crusader. He needed to solidify a plan, articulate roles, and set attainable goals that would allow each member to contribute meaningfully. A thrill ran through him as he imagined the possibilities. What if they could create a forum where students shared their stories? Open discussions could pave the way for awareness, igniting a desire for change among the student body, or at least initiate curiosity where apathy once reigned. It was a path fraught with obstacles, administrative concerns, potential backlash, but Jake could no longer remain idle. The thought of enduring in silence grated at him, and he knew this was not merely a personal journey but a shared odyssey. Jake glanced toward May, who was flipping through a nearby book, seemingly immersed in her world yet bound by that invisible thread of solidarity they were weaving. He felt a surge of gratitude toward her. She could ground him, provide the balance he so desperately needed. Their alliance represented courage in its purest form, and this connection was critical if they hoped to weather the storm ahead. Suddenly the library door creaked open, and Clara entered, her presence weaving a thread of tension through the air. Jake's heart raced as he stood to greet her, ready to unveil his blueprint for action. Clara's cautious expression immediately put him on alert. The gentle nod she offered seemed full of unspoken questions. "Hey, Jake, sorry I'm late," Clara said, her smile softening the atmosphere. Yet the flicker of apprehension in her eyes suggested she wasn't as at ease as she pretended to be. "No problem," he replied, forcing a calm confidence into his voice. "I think we need to dive right into what we discussed." They settled at the table, a palpable silence stretching between them as Jake gathered his thoughts, fighting to maintain clarity. He turned to finger the notes he had written, his heart pounding. Clara waited, her brows slightly arched, the anticipation in her eyes both encouraging and daunting. Would he be able to articulate the magnitude of their task without losing the attention of those they hoped to inspire? "Let's start by outlining our goals." He took a deep breath. "We need a core message that resonates with others, something that amplifies our voices without shutting anyone down." Clara leaned in closer, her demeanor shifting. She finally said, "I'm in, but I need to know how you plan to make this happen without it falling apart." Jake swallowed hard, sensing the challenge. His mind raced back to May's strength, to the quiet determination that stirred something in his core. It all hinged on not only overcoming their individual doubts, but on harnessing each of their strengths as a collective. "We need to be prepared for resistance," he said firmly, locking eyes with Clara as he spoke. "There will be pushback. Administration won't like this, and some students might not either." Her gaze sharpened. "So what's your plan for facing that? Are you ready for the consequences of this?" Jake's resolve solidified. "Yes. If we want change, we have to put ourselves out there. It's risky, but the stakes are high, and our silence means more of the same." Clara's brow furrowed, processing his commitment. A heavy pause settled around them, reminiscent of the calm before the storm. The door swung open once again, charmingly punctuating the moment, and Jake's heart skipped a beat when he spotted May's familiar figure approaching them. It hit him suddenly. Their journey was about to collide with unforeseen forces, and how they responded in these delicate moments would define everything. But would they be able to keep rising together, or would their foundation crack under pressure? Just as he readied himself to embrace the upcoming discussion, another foreboding thought flickered. The very hearts they sought to inspire were tied to complex realities, each story a riptide that could either drag them under or propel them forward. Would they harness this potential or find themselves overwhelmed by the tides of skepticism? Jake's focus shifted as May settled into the chair opposite him, their energy mingling with Clara's anxiety. Her presence, usually a calming influence, felt now like a charged current threatening to overload the circuit. He could almost hear the unspoken expectations lining the edges of their small group, a pressure that weighed heavily upon him. As Clara leaned back, her brows still knitted in skepticism, Jake sensed the need to elevate his argument, to launch it with authoritative clarity. He recalled at that moment the countless discussions they've had in the shadows of this library, cloaked in secrecy, deliberating over the future they aspired to. This was it, the moment to unleash that dream into the light. "Clara," he began, his voice steady but infused with urgency. "I believe we need to establish a safe space for conversations that matter. A forum not only to share experiences, but to confront the discomforting realities we face daily. Our peers are thirsting for this change. They simply don't know how to voice their concerns yet." A hint of intrigue flickered in Clara's eyes, though her posture remained guarded. "And what do you envision happening during these discussions? How do we ensure that they're constructive rather than chaotic?" Jake took a breath, grounding himself in May's encouraging nod. "We can structure the discussions. We can lay out guidelines, allow individuals to share their stories, but also create roles to manage the flow. If we make it clear from the start that this isn't a blame game but an opportunity for growth, we can facilitate real conversations." The tension in Clara's shoulders eased slightly. "That's insightful," she conceded, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "But there's still going to be pushback. We could end up with backlash from those who feel threatened by honest conversation." Jake felt a familiar knot tighten in his gut. He had anticipated her hesitations, yet hearing them articulated felt more daunting. "I understand that. But isn't that part of leadership? To forge ahead, even when potential loss shadows our every step? We can't ignore the issues simply because they're uncomfortable." The air hung heavy between them as the truth lingered in the silence. Jake's resolve hung like a taut line beneath the surface of his words, waiting for Clara to grasp it. "What about us?" May spoke softly, her gaze bouncing between Jake and Clara. "What happens if the resistance isn't external but comes from within? Are we prepared for that?" Jake's heart thudded. A new layer of doubt began to peel back his bravado. Could they withstand the stress of internal conflict? The very essence of teamwork relied on unity. But what if their ideals clashed? "I think confrontation can be constructive," Jake replied slowly. "If we're honest about our varying perspectives, we'll foster an environment where challenges, instead of shutting us down, can push us forward." Clara finally nodded, her expression softening as if the weight of her skepticism lightened. "That's valid, but can we actually commit to that level of vulnerability?" As they began to flesh out their strategy, Jake felt flickers of excitement. Each proposal breathed life into his vision. They exchanged ideas, testing the framework of their budding movement, which both exhilarated and terrified him. Yet beneath the excitement, a chilling thought gripped him. The stakes had shifted significantly. This was no longer mere dialogue. These were lives and stories, potential transformations, hinging on their ability to connect amidst challenges. The fear of failure twisted at the edges of his mind, but he pushed it aside, leaning into the momentum. Suddenly, a voice from behind shattered their concentration. "Do you think you can really manage that?" The three turned abruptly to find Hugo, a classmate and known skeptic, leaning against the doorway. His arms were crossed, skepticism etched into his features. "You want to open up a dialogue, but isn't that just asking for trouble?" As Jake's heart raced again, he realized this confrontation was more than just words. This was the moment he had both dreaded and needed. Would he retreat under the weight of skepticism, or stand firm, fueled by the passion that had driven him this far? "Actually, Hugo," Jake said, locking eyes with him, "I think it's exactly the trouble we should be seeking." The air thickened with uncertainty. Jake could feel the stakes rising. An adversarial challenge suddenly loomed in the room, forcing him to confront not just this individual, but also the turbulent undercurrents of doubt pooling within himself. Would his confidence hold, or would what followed expose the cracks in their foundation? The moment hung suspended in the air, a mixture of anticipation and anxiety crackling around Jake like static electricity. He met Hugo's gaze, willing his own resolve to remain unshaken despite the churn of uncertainty within him. This was more than an argument. It was a point of no return. Trouble can spark change. Jake felt conviction claw its way to the surface. If we never confront our issues, we'll continue to drown in silence. Hugo raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. And what makes you think you can guide those discussions? You know how volatile emotions are when it comes to the truth. With adrenaline surging, Jake opened his mouth, determined to present an ironclad counter. Because I'm willing to lead by example. I'm ready to be vulnerable, and that's how we create trust. It's about embracing that discomfort, exploring those troubles you fear. Clara's gaze shifted, observing the exchange carefully. She seemed to sense the growing friction, the crackling tension in the air that could either explode or fuse into something powerful. But what if your example is just another performance? Hugo challenged, pressing further, his doubt a direct assault. Isn't there a risk that you'll end up disappointing everyone? A tightness wrapped around Jake's chest. He didn't want to retreat, but a rush of vulnerability coursed through him. What if he did fail? Would he lose not just the moment, but also the trust of his friends and peers? Disappointment is part of the journey, he replied. Each word felt as if it had been excavated from deep within. We're all terrified of failing, but the risk of staying silent is greater. We owe it to each other to try. Hugo, clearly unfazed, remained steady as a rock, crossing his arms tighter. And if you fall flat on your face? Jake took a breath, then another, grounding himself in the moment. Then we'll learn from it and keep pushing forward. I'm not looking for perfection. I just want to begin the conversation. May shifted slightly in her seat, a supportive glimmer sparking in her eyes. Jake latched onto her encouragement, steeling himself against Hugo's apparent disdain. You can hardly defend the idea of honest dialogue when you're afraid to face opposition. Hugo shot back. The challenge reverberated, each word emphasizing Jake's growing self-doubt. Yet something began to crystallize in his mind. Instead of seeing Hugo's skepticism as a barrier, he could view it as an opportunity to sharpen his vision and strengthen his resolve. What if this conflict pushed him to clarify his beliefs, to hone the principles he was willing to stand for? Look, Jake countered, his voice gathering strength. If this initiative fails, I'll accept the blame. But it will be an opportunity to reflect on what went wrong. You're right. This could get messy. But imagine the potential growth from that mess. If we're not willing to face the messiness of our reality, we're perpetuating it. A flicker of surprise crossed Hugo's face, and for just a heartbeat, the lines of his cynicism appeared momentarily softened. Clara watched, her expression shifting into one of contemplation. Perhaps there is something valuable in that, she admitted. But it can't just be about surviving the discomfort. It has to be about genuinely addressing the issues and empowering those involved. As the conversation shifted, Jake felt a newfound momentum building between them. The very fear that had gripped him moments ago was now transforming into determination. He realized the paradox before him. Embracing discomfort was necessary not only to prove his point, but also to define who he wanted to become as a leader. In that moment he decided. Let's take a poll, he proposed, his voice even and strong. We can reach out to others, gauge interest in this initiative. If we're serious about changing the narrative, we need engagement, real engagement. The notion of the poll sent a fresh pulse of energy through the group. Jake could feel the excitement stirring again, the potential resuming its forward momentum. They were on the cusp of something transformative, yet another shadow loomed over them. Would they truly be prepared for the results? How would they navigate the diversity of perspectives and potential resistance when it arrived at their doorstep? Hugo stared at Jake, the skepticism gone but a challenge still etched on his face. You're playing with fire, Jake. Just remember that when the flames get too close, it's not just you who might get burned. Jake nodded, the echoes of his words reverberating back in surprising clarity. But listening deeper, he sensed that this was not just about warning signs. It was a call to build a firewall of resilience around his aspirations, one that could withstand criticism and foster meaningful change. Faced with the looming uncertainty, Jake knew his next steps would demand integrity and resolve. How much was he willing to sacrifice to protect his vision? And what consequences would arise when the flames inevitably flickered dangerously close? The meeting shifted into a collaborative rhythm, driven by the weight of ambition and burgeoning resolve among the group. Jake felt the energy of the room, a growing collective desire to challenge the status quo. As they brainstormed, May contributed insights from her perspective as an exchange student, and Clara organized the thoughts, meticulously crafting a structured approach. Each word they exchanged felt both significant and transformative. Jake's mind buzzed with possibilities, yet uncertainty still hovered like a specter. They had decided to launch a survey, to genuinely gauge their peers' interest in initiating conversations around diversity and inclusion. As the idea took shape, their excitement became palpable, igniting a fire in Jake's heart. He had spent too long on the periphery, paralyzed by the murmur of fear. Now, he was at the forefront, shaping something larger than himself. But as the initial thrill subsided, the reality crystallized. Once the survey was distributed, there would be no turning back. Hesitation seeped into his thoughts. What if students dismissed their plans? What if their initiative crumbled under scrutiny? These worries began to mingle with the exhilarating prospect of catalyzing genuine change. Hours later, as they finished drafting the survey questions, Clara turned to him, her gaze focused. "Jake, I appreciate your passion, but we must prepare for pushback. Are you sure you can handle it? This isn't just an academic exercise anymore." Jake felt a surge of conviction rise within him. "I've wrestled with my fears long enough, Clara. If we don't put ourselves out there, we're just perpetuating silence. I won't shy away from the backlash. I want to create a culture where everyone's voice is valued, where silence isn't the default answer." May smiled, a glimmer of understanding between them. Her confidence had swelled through their discussions, and Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility for not only his growth, but hers too. They were forging a path toward empowerment together. As they finalized the survey, an underlying current of tension thrummed in the air, a mix of hope and uncertainty about their ability to generate momentum. Jake sensed he would no longer be merely standing on the sidelines. He was claiming his place in the discourse. The day arrived to launch the survey. As students began to receive the link, whispers of interest spread like wildfire. Curiosity piqued. Jake felt the palpable excitement and anxiety mingling. For the first time, voices rushed into the open, children of quiet fears being freed. But with that fire, shadows of doubt crept in. The Office of Student Affairs was alerted to the initiative, and soon the administration sought out Jake. He found himself summoned to discuss the implications of the survey, immediately feeling the weight of scrutiny. As he awaited the meeting, Jake steeled himself mentally and emotionally. It suddenly dawned on him the juxtaposition he faced, confronting not only the external resistance from authority figures, but reckoning with his own growth. This wasn't just a test of advocacy, it was a test of identity. He entered the conference room, where several members of the administration sat, expressions serious and scrutinizing. As they spoke, Jake listened intently, their words licorice, a mix of tension and authority. "We've received numerous concerns about your initiative. It raises significant questions regarding our institutional values and existing protocols." Jake clenched his hands on the table, imagining the connections he'd fostered. Then a thought landed quietly but firmly. This wasn't merely his battle. It was a collective effort. The emails, the buzz on campus, they were all points in a larger picture he was now representing. "I understand your concerns," Jake said, his voice steady as he locked eyes with each member in the room. "But this isn't just a singular approach to addressing these issues. It's about fostering dialogue, creating a community where the voices of all students matter. The perception of danger you feel stems from the fear of change. But I believe change is necessary for progress." The air crackled with tension as he spoke, the air weaving through the room thick with expectation. The dean of students inhaled deeply, then replied, "Dialogue is important, but implementational issues raise concern. Are you willing to navigate the fallout? What if the environment becomes divisive?" Jake took a breath, a wave of determination pushing through him. Facing resistance here confirmed his need to persist. If there is divisiveness, we can navigate it together. My aim is not to create division but rather to foster understanding and growth. We can't shy away from discomfort. It spurs growth. As their dialogue continued, Jake's responses became more assured, cohesive, and reactionary. He understood that challenges would arise, but every counterpoint from the administration solidified his purpose. Their concerns were just reiterations of the realities he had already recognized. When the meeting adjourned, Jake left with head held high. It was a concrete achievement. He had faced authority without retreat, standing firm for what he believed in. But moments later, as he glanced at the campus bustling around him, fear crept back. He had stepped up, yes. But would he truly lead with resilience when doubts converged? Yet it was here he felt May's encouragement echoing in his mind. She had awakened the voice inside him, made him realize that strength was not merely an absence of fear but the ability to confront it. Days turned to weeks as the initiative blossomed, spurred by their resilience. Students began signing on to host discussions and advocate for change, embracing the dialogues they had started. Yet the skepticism remained, with occasional backlash surfacing. But this time, Jake harnessed focus and clarity from those moments. Each response was a chance to stand firm, a moment to reinforce the importance of courage. Jake recognized how immensely he had transformed, learning to wield his fears into energy that galvanized others. The reflection upon his journey brought pride that resonated deeply. He was not merely advocating. He was becoming adept at navigating conversations, synthesizing voices into a chorus of change. By the time the first official dialogue unfolded, the room buzzed with anticipation and thrilling energy. May was alongside him, creating a space for voices clamoring to be heard. Jake felt solid confidence anchor within. He was no longer the hesitant rancher standing on the porch. He was an architect of change. As the discussions flowed, Jake's heart raced, not from fear but from a sense of hopeful anticipation. By embracing vulnerability, he had unleashed potential that extended far beyond himself. In that moment, Jake recognized his journey's transformative scope. The past had taught him resilience. The present illuminated his responsibility to uplift others. As the discussions wrapped, the room erupted in applause. This was more than just a success, it marked a turning point, a collective acknowledgement that courage could sway discussions, open doors, and ultimately build community. Jake left feeling buoyed by a potent sense of fulfillment. He had not only faced his fears but emerged grounded in newfound clarity and strength. The shadows of his past had given way to a bold, optimistic future, and with that, he knew this journey had only just begun. Together, they were recharting destinies, igniting conversations and sprinting toward the realm of possibility. Jake stood ready to lead, having conquered the barriers of fear and insecurity, bridging the gap with unwavering resolve and compassion. Now was the moment, for each voice to stand and be heard, for courage to reshape narratives across the campus. Though uncertainty would continue to rise and challenge him, Jake understood this. He was more than just a player in the dialogue. He was now a cornerstone of change. And with this realization that coursed through him, Jake was ready for everything that the future held and every challenge that lay ahead. So you need to subscribe now to capture each moment of this spectacular transformation and not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm, boosting these vital conversations because your support truly makes a difference. Comment below your reactions and theories about this ending. Your voices matter and deserve to be heard. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion and rally towards transformation together. Let's create a wave of change, one story at a time.